Imagine returning home after years away, only to find someone else claiming authority over your very own land. That's exactly what happened when Daniel Carter, a retired rancher, drove back to his family's ranch after working overseas. As he pulled through the dusty road leading to the place he grew up, a sharp voice cut through the air. A woman in neatly pressed clothes stood with arms crossed, glaring. She was the self-proclaimed HOA president, Karen, and she didn't waste a second. "You can't be here. This is regulated property now," she barked. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. She didn't recognize him, didn't know the history tied to the land she stood on. The ranch wasn't just dirt and wood, it was his father's legacy, his grandfather's sweat, his childhood memories. And now, this stranger dared to call the cops on him. But what Karen didn't know was that Daniel wasn't just a rancher returning home. He had been overseeing something far bigger, something that gave him power she couldn't imagine. The sirens echoed in the distance, and Karen smirked, confident she had won. Daniel stood tall, his weathered hands resting on his belt, his eyes never leaving the house he once called home. The deputy stepped out, looking at Daniel with hesitation. Karen wasted no time, pointing at him. "This man is trespassing. I demand you remove him." But the officers glanced at each other, uncertain. One of them quietly recognized Daniel. Not from the town, but from the national reports about property law. Daniel's reputation carried weight far beyond the county line. Still, he said nothing, only smiled as the officers asked Karen for paperwork. She stumbled, her confidence shaking, as she realized her authority was only as strong as the fear she could instill. Daniel finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Before you decide who owns this land, maybe you should know who I really am." The silence that followed made Karen's smirk falter. Crowds began to gather, neighbors curious about the commotion. Karen tried to regain control, shouting about HOA regulations, noise ordinances, and property codes. But Daniel stood in the middle of it all, unshaken. His presence commanded attention. People whispered, some recognizing him from national headlines, others simply sensing his quiet strength. He finally addressed the crowd. "This ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. And I haven't been gone without purpose. For the last decade, I've overseen homeowner associations across the United States. Every code, every bylaw, every case, you name it, I know it." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Karen's face paled. The very man she had called the cops on was the one who could overrule her entire position with a single decision. The power she thought she held slipped like sand through her fingers, and for the first time, Karen realized she might have picked the wrong fight. Karen's voice cracked as she tried to shout back. "That doesn't matter. HOA rules are HOA rules." But the officers crossed their arms, watching Daniel with respect. He reached into his truck and pulled out a worn leather folder, filled with documents and stamped approvals. "These aren't just papers," he explained, "they are federal oversight records. I've been entrusted with authority over HOAs nationwide. I know every loophole, every legal boundary. And I know when those boundaries have been abused." The crowd leaned in, murmuring louder now. Some even nodded in agreement. Karen's confidence crumbled. Her threats suddenly sounded hollow. Daniel continued, his voice carrying strength, "I've seen people lose homes, families torn apart, all because of greed hiding behind HOA rules. That ends today. Especially here." The air grew heavy, and for the first time, Karen looked small. She had called the wrong man an intruder, and now the truth was catching up. The neighbors began to share their own frustrations, one after another. Complaints about fines for lawn colors, for mailbox sizes, even for leaving Christmas lights up too long. Karen had ruled with an iron fist, and people had stayed silent out of fear. But Daniel's presence lit a spark. They started to speak louder, bolder. "She charged me $500 for painting my shutters," one man cried. "She threatened foreclosure when I planted a tree," shouted another. Karen's face turned red, but she couldn't silence them anymore. Daniel listened, nodding, each testimony fueling the truth. "This," he said, raising his voice over the crowd, "is why I took this role. To make sure no community ever suffers under false power. You forgot something important, Karen. An HOA doesn't own the people, it serves them." His words struck deep, and even the officers exchanged approving glances. Karen's empire was crumbling before her very eyes. Karen tried one last desperate move. She waved her phone in the air, threatening lawsuits and higher fines, promising she would take every neighbor down with her. But no one listened anymore. The crowd had shifted, no longer afraid, no longer silent. Daniel stepped closer, his voice steady but sharp. If you want to test your power against mine, you're welcome to try. But remember, your entire HOA board answers to my office. The silence was deafening. Karen's phone slipped from her hand, clattering against the ground. The officers stepped forward, advising her to calm down. She realized in that moment that her reign was over. She had tried to intimidate a man who not only owned the land but oversaw every rule she thought protected her. Daniel picked up her phone, handed it back politely, and said, "This ranch is my home. And no one, not even you, can take that away." The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the ranch. Neighbors stood together, their voices no longer silenced, their eyes filled with newfound hope. Daniel looked over the land, his heart heavy with memories yet alive with purpose. Karen, now silent and defeated, slowly walked away, her empire of fear dissolved in a single day. Daniel turned to the crowd, speaking with calm conviction, "This land is more than soil and fences. It's about people. It's about fairness. And I promise you, I'll keep fighting until every family in this country feels safe in their own home." Applause broke out, strong and unified. What began as a confrontation ended as a revolution in spirit. Karen had called the cops, but instead of removing Daniel, they had revealed his true power. And for the first time in years, the ranch, and the community, finally felt free.